Here are the crypto top headlines covered in this video. Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong on SEC ETF decision. We'll see new pools of capital come into Bitcoin. Next, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink. Bitcoin ETF approvals are stepping stones towards tokenization. Also, SEC Chair Gensler on Bitcoin ETF approval. The underlying asset is highly speculative and volatile. Welcome to Crypto Top Headlines, where there's no clickbait thumbnails or titles, and no speeches on my opinions, just bringing crypto's news to you. We are a new channel here on YouTube, and would greatly appreciate it if you would click on the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell. It does help support the channel, so thank you in advance for doing so. Now, on to these headlines. Our first top headline is an interview with Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong on SEC ETF approval. We'll see new pools of capital come into Bitcoin.
Coinbase is the custodian for most of those instruments, and I spoke with the company CEO Brian Armstrong last night, first on CNBC. This was right after the decision came out, and I asked him about the magnitude of this moment.
This is a monumental step for the crypto industry and for Coinbase too. And the reason is that, look, there's 52 million Americans who have been using crypto over the past decade. And I think they've been hungry for some kind of acknowledgement from government and the SEC in particular that this asset class is here to stay. And they finally got that. It took a long time. I want to give a big shout out to Grayscale, which is one of the firms that pursued this in the court to finally get it to fruition. But it finally happened. We had a number of ETFs approved today. And of course, it was a big day for Coinbase too, because we were named as the custodian in 10 out of 13 of these applications. So I think this means that over time, we'll see new pools of capital come into Bitcoin. But more importantly, we had a huge regulatory milestone that showed the legitimizing power of this industry.
How much does this impact your business?
Well, we're not sharing any kind of projections or revenue numbers, but I can tell you this is very win-win. And the reason is that, yes, we're going to generate revenue as the custodian of 10 out of 13 of these ETFs. And that's great for these new pools of capital that want to come in and get exposure to Bitcoin. But our existing customers and our retail app, where we've had all these people come in and get crypto to date, they don't just want exposure to Bitcoin. They also want to use Bitcoin for a variety of things. They want to use the other crypto assets out there for commerce and staking and Web3 and decentralized identity. And so, this is the future of money we're talking about here.
There are going to be people who have wanted to get access to the Bitcoin world, to invest in Bitcoin. Historically, the only real way they could do that was to use Coinbase, for example, to buy Bitcoin and hold it. Now they're going to be able to buy a Fidelity ETF or the Grayscale ETF or the BlackRock ETF. How does that impact your business? Now, I know you're the custodian on one end, but it also means that those customers don't necessarily have to get an account on Coinbase.
People who've been buying crypto for the last decade and using it, the 52 million Americans, they already had an option, right? They could come to Coinbase and they're going to continue to do that. This ETF is really about unlocking new pools of capital that weren't previously available. They didn't have a way to get exposure to crypto. And so now they can come in and get exposure to Bitcoin. That's great. New pools of capital come in. But that's kind of the first step in people's journey around crypto. Once they get a little bit of exposure to the asset class, they start to think about, okay, well, how might this be used in different ways? And crypto is the future of money. It's going to enable people to unlock all kinds of utility, which we can talk about if you want. But I think many of them will graduate from ETFs to actually holding it directly and then starting to use it directly.
So in a blog post, you say that spot Ether, a spot Ether ETF, can quickly follow. How soon do you think that happens? And then beyond that, is it Solana? Is it you name the coin? How do you see this playing out?
Yeah, well, obviously that's not entirely in our hands, so I can't give you an exact date. But I do think that this will hopefully pave a way for other crypto assets to have their own ETFs. And then, frankly, we should have index funds for crypto assets too, just like the S&P 500. Hopefully maybe one day it'll be the Coinbase 500 or something like that. And you could even imagine different index funds that focus on DeFi or staking or NFTs or different subsets of the crypto market. So this is a really important new area of the financial, markets, and I think that it'll have all kinds of new products come to market after this.
As you read through the decision today, was there anything that struck you about the words and maybe the word choice that the SEC used? And the reason I'm even asking this question is, to me, sort of reading through it, this was an approval, but almost an unenthusiastic one. It was one in which you could sort of feel a sense that they felt boxed in large part by the lawsuit that you referenced earlier from Grayscale and that decision. But left to their own devices, this is not something they would have done by themselves, and what that portends for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like it was kind of a begrudging approval. So, on the one hand, I'm glad we have an approval. It's a recognition for the 52 million Americans who are excited about this, and hopefully more in the future. But would it have been better if it had followed a more typical process, if it had been held to the same standard as other ETFs? Absolutely. I mean, we have our own case with the SEC, for better or worse. That's not something that we ever really wanted to be in that situation. But if we're not going to get clear rules from the regulator, unfortunately, we may have to avail ourselves of the court to get case law created. The court's played a big role, as you mentioned, in these ETFs. And then ultimately, I think we're going to have to look to Congress to pass new laws, because ultimately that's where the regulators derive their authority. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that we do need new laws on the book to clarify some of these outstanding issues around what's a commodity, what's a security, the different types of market structures that could apply to crypto.
Does this change your relationship with the SEC or how you might pursue lawsuits in the future?
My hope is that we've had really great conversations and relationships with the SEC staff that are there, from one administration to the next. They've been great to work with. I think that we want to continue to engage with them so that this can be a trusted and regulated industry in the United States. It's really a shame that we've had to kind of go to the courts to get clarity, and that's what Grayscale had to do in these ETF cases as well. That's not the right way that rulemaking should take place under the Administrative Procedures Act. It's not the way that we want to engage. We've shown up for dozens of meetings. We've really showed a good faith effort to provide every piece of information that they've ever asked for. And whenever we've kind of asked for clarity, we don't get an answer back. We get a Wells notice. So that's not the way that relationship should ideally work. And we're committed to working with them indefinitely.
What did you make of the Twitter hack yesterday? I'm sure you first saw the tweet or the X post come up, and I don't know, did you think it was real? What did you think?
I don't want to comment on that. It's unfortunate that cybersecurity incidents are so prevalent out there, and they've happened to many people in the crypto industry too. So I have a lot of sympathy. We all need to kind of make sure that our systems are secure. And it was unfortunate that was a distraction from what was otherwise a really important announcement.
Do you see flows, and you've been watching this, especially the last couple of months? Obviously, Bitcoin, the price of Bitcoin has been on a tear, in large part, arguably, because of speculation that this day was going to come. What do you think that means and portends for the price of Bitcoin in the short term and in the long term?
Well, I try not to ever focus too much on the short term. The volumes today I didn't see any major price movements happen, but I think you're right. Over the last 2 to 3 months, the market did move up quite a bit, and probably that was at least in part due to the anticipation of these approvals. So look, I'm optimistic on that. I think these approvals will bring in new pools of capital over the coming many years. I try to take a long-term perspective on this, and we really just want to help 1 billion or more people hopefully benefit from this technology on Coinbase's platform. We're not so much interested in the day-to-day movements of it. 25
years from now, 50 years from now, where is this day going to stand in the historical context of business and money?
Maybe right up there with when the first Bitcoin purchase happened, for a piece of pizza, I think for 25,000 Bitcoin or something. I don't know. We'll see. But there's been a lot of historic moments along the way. And, my hope is that we get many more of these. I'm not sure what the next one would be. Maybe a central bank holding Bitcoin, something like that would be a next milestone. We'll see.
Let me pause here for a moment. If you're getting value out of this video, please click on the like and subscribe buttons as well as the notification bell. Our next top headline is an interview with BlackRock CEO Larry Fink Bitcoin ETF approvals are stepping stones towards tokenization.
It's the first time we've had an opportunity to talk to you about it, which is Bitcoin, the Bitcoin ETF. We're going to be talking to Gary Gensler, the chair of the SEC, who made that decision reluctantly, maybe even begrudgingly, which was announced just 2 days ago, and we talked a lot about yesterday on the broadcast. How big a deal is that for BlackRock? And this was, for you, a big switch as well, because you were a naysayer for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I probably switched. For the first 3 years of thinking about it, I was a naysayer, and about 2 years ago, I switched. And I'm actually, as I said in the last 2 years, I'm a big believer.
Are you a believer personally? Meaning, is the Fink family a Bitcoin buyer or a buyer of this new ETF?
Well, now I could do that. I cannot, I don't want to compete with our clients, so I don't buy single assets. I'll buy mutual funds. I'll buy single ETFs. So I have an opportunity to do that now. But I'm a believer in it because I do believe it is an alternative source for wealth holding. I don't believe it's ever going to be a currency. I believe it's an asset class.
You don't believe it ever becomes a currency?
No, I think we're going to create digital currencies. We're going to use the technology for it. We're going to use the blockchain.
How important is that, though, to then the long-term value proposition
of Bitcoin?
Of Bitcoin. If it's not something that ultimately becomes a currency, if it's simply, we'll call it digital gold, it's an asset of some sort, what does that mean?
It means,
in terms of price,
I believe it goes up if the world is more frightened, if people have fearful of geopolitical risk, they're fearful of their own risk. It's no different than what gold represented over thousands of years. It is a asset class that protects you.
Right.
And unlike gold, where we manufacture new gold, we're almost at the ceiling of the amount of Bitcoin that we created.
When you hear somebody like Cathie Wood,
yes,
who was on our broadcast yesterday, say that her base case is that this turns into a $600,000 a Bitcoin valuation, base case, and a million plus in a super optimistic case. Are you anywhere in her realm?
I haven't thought about it. To me, that what we are trying to do is offer an instrument that can store wealth. I think if it gets that even close to that high, gold will represent even a bigger value. And let's be clear, if you think it's digital gold, there's going to be a reference point between gold and Bitcoin. But let me get back to what happened yesterday. A part of our announcement that you mentioned in the opening, that we changed the architecture of our firm.
Right.
And much of it has to do with how we think about iShares and ETFs. When we bought BGI, very few people believed in that acquisition. And we were pretty mistreated for a couple of years, because we said active and passive can coexist. Obviously, we were right in that. Two, we said the fixed income market will be transformed through ETFs. That has now happened. Yesterday, we had the first day of Bitcoin ETFs. And our reorganization is taking that ethos of what has happened over the last 10 years. We believe ETFs is the technology that's going to transform every asset class. We believe everything will be done through ETFs. And so we believe this is just the beginning, and we needed to embed ETFs across the entire. So
what does that mean? If you're Rick Reeder, who we've had on the broadcast for years.
Rick is now doing more ETFs in his active space now. There's a great example of how we are taking what a very active investor and putting that into an ETF platform. Let me be clear. I think ETFs are step one in the technological revolution in the financial markets. Step two is going to be the tokenization of every financial asset. And to me, this is where we believe it's going. So we're looking at Bitcoin, we're looking at ETFs in the same manner. These are technological changes that can allow us to move forward.
What did you see yesterday, by the way, in terms of inflows as it relates to Bitcoin?
We were very happy with the flows. It appears that we received about 40% of the flows yesterday. I mean, one day doesn't make anything.
Are these new customers? Are these people who are coming out of other funds? I mean, Grayscale is the biggest player in this space right now. Are you trying to take share from them in terms of taking those clients over, or are you trying to create a new class of customer?
Primarily, we're trying to create an opportunity for new customers can invest in this financial instrument. Over the long run, do we believe, just think about the fee differential between an ETF and some of these trusts.
Right.
These trusts are like 120 basis points.
Very expensive. We were talking with the head of Grayscale yesterday. And still an expensive product.
And these are 20 to 30 basis points in the ETF wrapper.
Well, it's expensive, by the way, for if you're a Grayscale customer to sell your shares.
Well, it's very
taxes.
expensive. Yes, and this is the big issue with the SEC, and this is something you may want to ask Gary. The industry asked to transfer in kind into an ETF, and that was denied by the SEC. That's a fine.
Meaning let's just put a fine point on that. The industry, meaning companies like yours, asked the SEC to allow folks who might have owned shares via a Grayscale to be able to transfer those in kind to a BlackRock or to Fidelity or whomever.
And so that there would be no tax ramifications. That was not denied. They wanted to really just create from scratch cash only, which we all respect the SEC's reasoning.
That creates an opportunity actually for Grayscale to keep those customers for a much longer time.
It does, but I think over the long run, when you start adding up the fees and adding up the fees, people are going to start thinking about redeeming and then ultimately going into an ETF.
Longer term, do you now expect other cryptocurrency ETFs? Meaning, do you think that Gary, and we'll talk to him later, Gary
like Ethereum
will have to approve an Ethereum ETF? And is that a function of something the SEC has to do, or do you think that all these things have to go to court first?
I couldn't respond to that. I see value in having an Ethereum ETF. As I said, these are just stepping stones towards tokenization. And I really do believe this is where we're going to be going. We have the technology to tokenize today. If you want to talk about, think about this. If you had a tokenized security and you have a tokenized identity, you, Andrew, the moment you buy or sell an instrument, it is known. It's on a general ledger that is all created together. You want to talk about issues around money laundering and all that. This eliminates all corruption by having a tokenized system.
Jamie Dimon disagrees with you on that, but, or at least to some degree.
Our next top headline is an interview with SEC Chair Gensler on Bitcoin ETF approval. The underlying asset is highly speculative and volatile.
Joining us right now, first on CNBC, following that decision that some have described as historic, is SEC Chair Gary Gensler. Chair Gensler, we appreciate you being with us. Let me start by asking you this. Do you consider the decision historic? And it appears that it's a decision that you made either reluctantly or perhaps even begrudgingly.
Well, look, Andrew, this has been considered for a long time. As you know, starting under Chair Clayton, we had disapproved a number of these over the years, and something had changed. I'm a deep believer in the rule of law and a respect for the courts, and taking a new court decision into consideration, we move forward. I think this is the most sustainable path forward.
So it appears, though, from what you're saying and reading through the decision as well, that what changed is not necessarily something inherent to crypto or Bitcoin per se, but what changed was what the courts did. Is that the way to think about this?
Well, again, I mean, we do everything here at the Securities and Exchange Commission within the law and within how the courts interpret those laws. And that's what the American people expect, and that's what we do here.
What is your message to investors about Bitcoin now? Because we're going to have all sorts of public investors now potentially have access to Bitcoin in a way that they didn't before. We were just talking to Larry Fink. He said that he got a huge wave of new investors getting into Bitcoin through this ETF. You have still suggested to be cautious about it. And I'm trying to understand how you think about those cross currents in terms of the message you're telling investors.
Well, look, Bitcoin itself, we did not approve, we do not endorse. This is a product called an exchange-traded product, a way that investors can invest in that underlying non-security commodity called Bitcoin. But yes, investors, I think, should be aware that the underlying asset is a highly speculative, volatile asset. And amongst its use cases is really for illicit activity, money laundering and sanctions and ransomware and the like. And I know that you've asked other people over the last few days, is it being used as a store of value? It's a speculative, volatile store of value. Is it being used as a payment anywhere? Are we buying cups of coffee with it? Not really. The only payment mechanism it's being used for, in sort of in a primary sense, is illicit activity. So I think you've been spot on about that, Andrew.
So just on that note, Mr. Chairman, this is out, and I'm not going to take either side on the whole thing, and it's kind of funny. But these are, I don't know the exact units, but if you look since 2017, what's been used to launder money, 20,000 is the unit for, 20,000 is the unit for a dollar, 33 is the unit for Bitcoin. So that's a multiple of I don't know how much for dollars being used for money laundering versus Bitcoin. But now I could see Bitcoin bears saying, really? Well, it's not even good for money laundering. Then it has zero value. I could just see that as another arrow in the quiver for the bear case. But the question I wanted to ask you was this: let's take the continuum. Let's take the rat poison, Beanie Baby, Jamie Dimon, Charlie Munger versus we had yesterday on our Coinbase CEO. Did you hear him make the case for Bitcoin? I mean, it was almost like a symphony to Bitcoin bulls, Chair Gensler. The proof of work, akin to gold. Every monetary aspect we've had for thousands of years is represented perfectly. And Tom Lee, there's never been a mistake on the blockchain out of trillions of transactions. You understand it. You taught at MIT. Which is it? Is it a Beanie Baby in your view, or is it something that has inherent value that's going to be part of the financial system decades from now? Which is it?
Look, no doubt there are innovations within this field, and those innovations, which I taught about at MIT, around a ledger system. It's just an accounting system called the blockchain technology. But there's an irony in the midst of this. Satoshi Nakamoto said this was going to be a decentralized system. And finance, this has led to centralization. Think about the irony of those who say this week is historic. This was about centralization and traditional means of finance that investors who could already express themselves in Bitcoin, you could already, before this week, buy it through major brokerage houses. But now you can buy it through this thing called an exchange-traded product
but the
as
underlying
well,
asset still has
centralized.
The underlying asset still has the decentralized, distributed ledger, all those characters. That sounds like a, I don't know. That sounds like
no, Andrew. With all respect, there's a lot of centralization here, and even the underlying ledger. Largely, the Bitcoin's produced by a handful of mining companies and the like. And so I'm just saying, now in terms of monetary history, we have a dollar, we have a yen, we have a euro, we have the renminbi, and there's a reason for it because we do have a common economy that relies on those currencies.
Chair Gensler, let me ask you this, though. Is there a possibility, despite the fact that this has been now approved, that this spot ETF has been approved, that you could see a day where Bitcoin itself in some way would be outlawed? I ask because if you recall, and now there's a lawsuit taking place between Coinbase and the SEC. They went public and they've now made, you've come back and said that there are certain unregistered securities and the like that are on their platform. They say, well, if you approved us the first time, how can you come back and say that this is not kosher? And so I think there is this other question about, and I know you're not endorsing Bitcoin, does that still open up the possibility that Bitcoin could somehow come under fire from the SEC or some other agency?
Look, let me talk about this field more broadly. and the American public is aware of this. It's rife with conflicts. It's rife with fraud and abuse without prejudging any one token. Many of these tokens, I would suggest a majority of these tokens are actually securities under the securities law. And so the platforms, the various places that you might buy or sell these crypto security tokens need to come into compliance with the federal laws.
What did you make of what Elizabeth Warren, who was very supportive of you taking this role originally, coming out and saying the SEC is wrong on the law and wrong on the policy?
I have deep respect for those who may have been on the other side of this. But again, I have a deep respect for the law and how courts interpret the law. We had the D.C. Circuit, a three-judge panel rule on this. We looked at it, and I thought this was the most sustainable path forward.
How do you think about other cryptocurrencies? People are now talking about whether there should be an Ethereum ETF and the like. Is that something you think you would take on proactively? Is that something that ultimately, in the same way that Grayscale had to go to court, does the court decision around Bitcoin to you act as a precedent on other currencies?
I look at what we did this week as it's cabined to one non-security commodity called Bitcoin. Like we've had gold, spot, exchange-traded products, and silver exchange-traded products in the past and approved in the past, this is cabined just to that one non-security commodity token.
So this concludes our top headlines. If you haven't already done so, don't forget to click on the like and subscribe buttons, as well as the notification bell. Also, leave your thoughts in the comments and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you all for watching Crypto Top Headlines, bringing crypto's news to you.